Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to be here for a project that I have spent so much time, basically half a year now, working on. I'm just really glad to be here, just to talk about books that I loved and didn't love, but still had a lot of thoughts about. This is, I guess as it says in the title, ranking Booktuber favorites from worst to best. Basically, I wanted to do just read Booktubers' favorites as a way of hopefully finding books that I'll love, or at least find thoughtful and engaging, which I'll tell you now was very successful, at least on the latter part of that goal. The goal of ranking them from worst to best is just, a flashy, fun concept to talk around, or to sort of present the stuff, instead of just going one by one. I want to be very clear. As I rank these, this is not a ranking of the Booktubers, but of the books themselves. And if I include a booktuber on this, it's only because I love them. Okay, every booktuber I highlight on this channel or on this video is because there's someone that I enjoy watching and enjoy what they have to say about books, and I wanted to highlight. I've been struggling as much in my reading as I have in my booktube journey this year, but I've had some good reads, I've had some not so good reads, and you're gonna see the full scope of that experience really in this video. So without further ado, let us rank some of my favorite booktubers' favorite books of last year. First up, on the number 10 spot is
The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. I had the best time reading this. I thought it was just perfectly done, and I know for so many other people they have a lot of issues with it, but it felt so intentional to me, and I just loved the journey we were on. It felt so mundane and realistic of what might actually happen to you if you fell into this situation where one day you come home, you're a single person, and there's suddenly a person there who says, "Oh, I'm your husband." And then suddenly he goes up into the attic to get something, comes back down, and it's not him, it's a different man. And your life is completely changed. What I loved about this especially is there is logic within it. It's a realistic person she could end up with. It's not the most dramatic versions of her life, but it's this idea of like, when do you stop? Like, when is your life good enough? How do you know it's the perfect person? Will you always be chasing something more?
So let me start by saying I love the idea of this book. We have parallel worlds with alternate lives. On paper, it's a really fun concept. It's something that should work for me as someone who just loves alternate realities, multiverses, stuff like that, especially those that explore interpersonal relationships between people. That's really what drew me to this. Also, of course, Kayla's very glowing review of the book. The fact that it's number 10 tells you that I had problems with it on a few levels. I can see the appeal, and like I said, it is a fun book at the very least, and it's a really cool concept. My problem with it is on twofold. One, I thought there were some problematic aspects with the characterization, which is sometimes I think happens in speculative fiction, but also it lacked nuance and depth. I think those two sort of go hand in hand, where you have a concept that seems cool on paper, time travel's rife, about time, but you don't really dig deep into the concept and ask yourself, is there an emotionally manipulative nature to this concept that we're ignoring because we want to have a fun book? And I understand and respect this book wants to be that, and I think it's perfectly fine to want that kind of book. For me, it wasn't enough. Like, I can't get past that feeling. I have a whole review of this on Goodreads. What I'll say is, first off, the rules are inconsistent. It feels kind of lazy when we have rules, speculative rules that are arbitrarily designed to just create situations that someone wants to have and to manufacture. And I think it's intended to evoke a emotional response, because I think speculative fiction, speculative approaches are one of the easiest ways to evoke certain situations. But it's also why I can get kind of critical when I feel like it's done haphazardly, when you're not really delving into the full depth of conversation you could have about something. If this was the only problem was like it being sort of lazy, it'd probably be more of a 3-star. My problem is when it gets down to a 2-star, it's because there's parts of it, like I said, alluding to about time, that I feel are problematic. There's this character, the main character is, in my opinion, not likable. She is sociopathic, I think, in how she approaches these worlds. She is very self-centered, very much focused on her own interests, her own needs, and she convinces herself that the things she does don't really matter, that it's going to reset anyways. And ultimately, the author does sort of reinforce that notion by giving a clarity where I think ambiguity is much more interesting. But she doesn't want us to think about, I think, those iffy parts of what's going on. So she tries to do her best to make it as obvious and black and white as possible in setting up the rules of what's happening, which is to say, the resets that are happening are full resets. They aren't alternate worlds. They aren't branches of timelines that go on after she's gone. But even knowing that's the case, she never stops to ask this question. She just assumes this. She gets to reaffirm that. And again, I think it's evidence of sort of the lazy writing going on. And in this situation, even if it was a full reset, there's still this internal conflict that we should be having about the things that we do that we're willing to do in a situation. It's not just that she did these things, because it's hard to say what we would do in this kind of situation, but it's the lack of growth or challenging of her actions, the manipulative, abusive behavior that she has, her willingness to invoke violence to get what she wants. It is, like I said, sociopathic on a fundamental level, and it's not challenged. It's just accepted as a reasonable action. A perfect comparison to this is an episode of the second season of the new Twilight Zone that I just recently watched. Guy, it's a time loop, trying to manipulate this woman into having sex, into being with him, and it's the perfect example of just how fucked up this situation can be when it's abused to get power in a situation. And that's one reason I had a real big problem about it. I'm going so deep into this. Oh well, it is what this video is now. While I can see the appeal, specifically that Caleb refers to about being able to see these different lives, because that is, like I said, inherently just interesting. When you talk about a speculative concept, it's an easy way of manufacturing these very interesting concepts. But that's why I also think it's very easy to just use speculative fiction as a crutch rather than fully utilizing it to explore it on a deep level. And that's why this book ended up for me getting 2 stars. Number 2, we have
The Omnivore's Dilemma. That titular issue that Michael Pollan figuratively chews on throughout this book is all about the challenging decisions that we face every single day as omnivores, with all the choices out there of things for us to eat. What do we choose to eat? And Michael Pollan takes on this question by looking very closely at the American food system. He discusses how it operates, but then he takes a step outside of it in order to see it more clearly and point out its very clear flaws, but also when he considers more small-scale alternatives. He's so engaging in his writing, and he's so respectful in his approach. You can tell that his aim is to get you thinking. It's not necessarily to force any one idea on you. He wants you to think about these things as you're making the best decisions for you, your life, your family, your household. And if that was his aim, he was definitely successful with me.
I think a book Olive perfectly encapsulates my feelings around Pollan and his writing, and I see why he's such a mass appeal to so many people, or as a science writer and health writer, because his writing is just so encapsulating, like she sort of communicates here. And I think that's one of the best things about his work. It's thought-provoking. I can understand where Olive is coming from as far as the benefit she gets from it and the value of being able to understand this information better. My problem with it is that I feel there is a lack of nuance in the science. While I think he raises some interesting concepts, some ideas around the health industry and the food industry that forms in a capitalistic society. The truth is that I can't go as deeply into this book because it's so dense. It's just a lot of work to sit down and really reflect, break down piece by piece all the issues with it. I'm interested in doing that. The question is whether or not anyone's interested in hearing. So I'll say now, if you're interested in hearing me do a full breakdown of this book and my thoughts on it, the problems with it, let me know and I'll do it. Because when something is natural, it is inherently better. And while in a lot of ways, there are some things that are going to have a better effect. Like if you eat those fruits and vegetables, you're going to be healthier than if you eat processed food. But is it because processing it is less natural, is therefore less healthy? Or is it because processed food inherently has a combination of nutrients that are associated with a less healthy diet? And it's a nuanced conversation when we talk about health because of that reason. Some things like that where it's easy to simplify it down to a core concept that is fundamentally flawed. I think a good example of this was discussion of cornbread beef versus grass-fed beef being healthier, less healthy, and I believe that he had specific evidence of corn-fed beef as being associated with lower health. That's an interesting idea there. Like maybe there is an inherent value to grass feeding beef. Or is it that people who eat cornbread beef, probably cheaper beef, are also the kind of people who have an inherently different diet? If you're wealthy enough to afford grass-fed beef, that implies a certain level of privilege, probably a certain higher attention to what you're consuming, perhaps a more varied diet overall. And it's that sort of like a nuance that I have a problem with, where there's a compelling piece to what's being discussed, but we're not really breaking down it on a deep enough level, in my opinion, because we lean so heavily on this naturalistic fallacy. Another, I guess, example or way of thinking about the corn versus grass-fed option is when we talk about grass-fed beef being healthier than cornbread-fed beef, there was never a conversation about corn versus grass-fed versus no beef at all, where grass-fed beef may have some value of healthiness more than corn, but is it objectively different? Like, is it noticeably different on the health our way, however we want to weigh its health value to just not having beef at all? And that's the kind of conversation that I felt was lacking. I'm fixating this one example because it's the one that's fixated on my mind, and it's I guess a good example of if I were going to break down this book deeper, I would probably take more notes and make a point to think about all the problems, all the interesting but also problematic aspects of it. And one last thing I'll say here is that he doesn't, like, it's not as if this is bad science. He also leans on papers here for discussing this. That's not a flaw, though, in my opinion, is that it's easy to find a paper that supports one thing. I think the best way to get your health understanding is, one, talk to an expert who understands the science and how to reflect on the nuance there. But two, oftentimes I think meta reviews are a better way of approaching health science than just single papers, because single papers can say a lot. It is the meta-analysis or large systematic reviews of these papers that are able to extract noticeable facts or effects around health in what we're consuming. At its core, I think there is some value here, like, eat less meat, especially red meat, eat more vegetables and fruits, because there is a correlation, to be fair, between natural and natural being healthier and less natural being less healthy. But that's not necessarily because of the natural. Again, it's important to understand what is it about these two diets that make them healthy, that I think there's not a lack of substance, just not enough substance in this book. Now, number 7. Yes, number 7, we have
Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. Bloom is a sapphic horror novel, okay? We've got this gal and we got this other gal. This one gal's working at the farmer's market selling her wares, and this other gal comes to the farmer's market. They feel a spark, a connection. Things quickly go left. There may be murder. There is violence. Much violence, control, manipulation, gaslighting. Just know this is not a romance, okay? It may be sapphic, there's a sapphic relationship, but it's not a romance. But just know that it is in my brain. There are scenes that I see in my mind often that I think of where I'm like, girl, some heifers was not thinking right. Because I was like, had that happened in front of me, I would have been gone.
So this was initially going to be my number 8 on this list. And honestly, I gave it 3 stars. Upon rereading my review, it's at least higher than the last book, perhaps even almost a 3.5. I don't think it's quite there. Because I think my initial memory of this was that it was more negative than it actually is. There was a lot here to love. It's a compelling concept and a very fun read. As Jess said, it's a sapphic meat cute that becomes toxic and is really just a portent of much darker things to come. At its core, I think my problem is that it's a good idea, and honestly even good writing, but just poor execution in the structuring of the narrative. There was a deep emotional response that I got from reading this, and I recognized that and how Jess characterized the book. That's what the note I made. And it's just downright fun for that reason, because it's a very compelling book to read. I'm reading my notes. But like I said, as with the other two, the book lacks nuance. First thing is, this book advertises it as a horror book. So there's a shoe that's going to drop. And we sit in this meet cute for so long. We wait for the horror aspect to drop. And it's the final, I don't want to spoil it too much, but it's the final cliffhanger of the book. Honestly, I feel like the book would have worked better from just the completely restructuring of the narrative, but also in how it's advertised. Part of that is how we deal with the meet cute that translates into a toxic relationship, where to us, the reader, the toxic behavior is obvious. But in the story, it goes unchallenged for a long time from our main character. And it's not that the book doesn't acknowledge it, because I think the book does understand you can't just let this toxic stuff go on without acknowledging it. But it waits too long to do that, to the point that our main character just seems stupid. And I don't mean to say that toxic people who say toxic relationships are stupid, because I don't think that's the case. And also, I don't want to pretend to be an expert in this because I'm not. But to me, it just didn't feel real. I felt like it was so obvious to the reader, to the point that it just made our main character, the fact that she never reflected on, never thought to herself, this is toxic, even if she didn't want to bring it up, it made her seem like she was stupid because the story wasn't ready to deal with it. And I would have much more preferred if this narrative had made it much more subtle. So subtlety to the point where it's obvious upon reread, but on first read, it seems almost normal to us. My point is that it would have been more compelling if it was more as subtle to the reader as it was to the main character. As it stands, it was just frustrating to see this person in this toxic situation doing nothing to challenge it, nothing to step up for herself. And again, I don't mean to pretend like this can't happen in reality. I just feel like there's a lack of nuance that to me made it feel like it wasn't quite real enough. And then when we do deal with it, that's sort of the artificial climax of the story of breaking up, dealing with the toxicity before they rekindle. And it all happened too fast. One, the fact that she noticed it all, the fact that she finally caught on to the fact this was toxic and calling it out. It felt arbitrary. Like, this is, okay, now we're at this point where I want this to happen, so let's let the character finally figure it out. And the pivot of what allowed her to finally realize this didn't quite click for me. You can't go from someone being so stupid to finally having the emotional intelligence to recognize this. And then the fixing of it happened so quickly because you want to get to the real climax that it just wasn't satisfying to me. I feel like it's potentially more harmful than good to sort of rely on this toxic behavior and not really break it down. I don't want to say it's inherently harmful because it does deal with it, which is what I mean by the concept is good. The author has a good idea here, but I think it really could have just used some entire reworking. Let the artificial climax feel real. Let us spend like a good third or more of the book setting up the love story, and then the 1/3 point or something, maybe have them do the breakup, and then spend a solid third of the book actually rekindling and doing the emotional work to deal with the toxicity before finally getting to the final crux of the real climax of this person is a monster. And I don't mean to pretend like I'm an author. I'm not, and I don't mean to say this is the right way to do it. It was just, in my mind, it's one of those books where I can't help but think to myself, this could have been done better if it was done like this. And ultimately, that's very personal. I don't want to, like, I'm not so arrogant as to think that I am the end-all be-all of how to do X, Y, and Z. But that's my feelings on this book. It frustrated me. Not quite as bad as Husbands, but it still frustrated me. And next up is
They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Abdurraqib. This is also a collection of essays that uses music and culture as a lens to explore grief and identity and the complexity of being alive in a world that often feels impossible to navigate. It hit me very, very deeply. I think Abdurraqib has this very singular and incredible ability to make you feel as though you are in conversation with him that leaves you feeling in awe and almost smarter by association. I think the thing that I wasn't expecting when I went into this, knowing that it was going to be talking a lot about music, is that this is a grief book. Grief for loved ones, grief for communities, grief for moments lost to time, grief for violence. And yet it is not only just a book about loss. It ends up being this love letter to all of the things that sustain us through loss, like music, like art, like people, like community.
So this is an example of a backlist book that I never heard of that I decided to read because it sounded compelling. And Marina is one of the best booktubers, I think, at really giving thoughtful discussions about books. One of the reasons I had to highlight her here. In fact, she's going to be on this list twice. She talks about this amazing intersection of interpersonal, cultural, and social political topics. And that's really what pulled me to this book. And I agree with her that I think it is really interesting, especially as we think about it as it intersects with music. That is a really thoughtful way of having these conversations that I don't think that is, I think, a very unique take, which is, I think, oftentimes something that's missing in a lot of these socio-political books that have kind of discussions. There's a unique perspective that this author brings to it in a very compelling way. I really like this point in the list. We're at books that I solidly enjoyed, that I really liked. This book is number 6, mostly because it's just not as good as the others that have come, at least on a personal level. I'm not the kind of person who's really that into music. I can't say it worked on me on a fundamental level, but it's one that I solidly enjoy. I think I gave it 4 stars. It was a really good book. It's just no personal critique beyond it just not being the perfect book for me. And then next up at number 5, we have...
This is my favorite thing I've read all year. It's the Verkosigan saga. I've read a lot of Verkosigan this year. Like, I think I'm on book 12. I am having a great time, okay? I have been searching for a long sci-fi backlist series that would meet my tastes. It's so good. The sum is so much greater than the parts, but the parts are still so sturdy and strong and fun. The payoff of being with this cast of characters, of being in this world that has always been so fleshed out, but I finally feel like I'm an expert-ish on this world. Not really, but I've been to so many planets, I've seen so much tech, I've seen the politics. I am having so much fun. So, yeah, Verkosigan as a whole, my favorite book is probably A Civil Campaign, which I just read. Amazing. Truly phenomenal.
And specifically, I'm talking about the Shards of Honor, which I believe is the first book of the Verkosigan saga. I swear to God, I should have practiced before the video, but we're here. Angela, again, one of Hey Booktubers, who has great discussions, great recommendations. I think I read, this might be the second or third one from her list that I actually tried reading. The others I just had trouble getting through. My point was this was my first pick, mostly because it was an old backlist, one that obviously I want to read more backlist at the same time. It's I'd never heard of it. So ultimately, I'm glad that I chose to read this. I'm glad that the first one I tried didn't quite work out, because this is a very big series that was a real surprise to me. I remember starting to read it thinking, this is good. I don't quite see the love of it. It's basically just this sort of one of those futuristic stories. We have a space opera and socio-political things happening in space and some interpersonal relationships. And I think Angela perfectly encapsulates what makes this series so good. I've only read the first one so far. And it's just the surprising level of depth that comes to this. There was this story, set in space, this conflict going on, and it was fine. And then the story pivots a third or 2/3 of the way through this book to a completely different story. It always felt like a completely different story. I was taken aback in a very good way. And I was like, this is not what I thought it was. And it's really somehow unique despite being so old. And I think it really did a really good job of just creating situations, making it seem bigger than it actually was, or more than just my idea of what it would be, and just have a series of characters that are quite likable and interesting to learn about. So I am very thankful to Angela for hyping this up as much as she did. It may not have been the specific one she was talking about, but I wasn't going to read through the entire series just to get to that book. But still, I'm excited to continue the series. Then next up at number 4.
My favorite book of the year is I Was a Teenage Slasher by my favorite author, Stephen Graham Jones. This is fantastic, but obviously not for everybody. So this is about a couple teenagers who live in the 80s in Texas. And we have the main character decades later that he's writing this memoir for us to read about the summer that he was a slasher and killed people. It's a very repetitive book, stream of consciousness. You're in this guy's head and he's just saying I was a killer, I was a killer, I was a slasher. But I'm really one for the inner ramblings. This main character, Tolly, and his best friend, Amber, are trying to figure out the mystery of what is going on and why Tolly starts killing people. I feel like we really get to know them and care about their friendship. It's also just this really campy, funny take on the slasher genre. It's one of the most unique ideas that I have seen in horror. There's also a lot of horror cliches, but it's in a really self-aware way.
There were some new releases that I just wanted to read, and Kayla had read a lot of them, or has read a lot of them, which is why I've highlighted her twice here. And I'm glad I have a chance to do that, because I want to make it clear, I think she has great recommendations. Even if I didn't love Husbands, it was still a book that on paper I should love. And this is a perfect example of that. This is a solid, I didn't give the rating down, at least 4 stars, maybe 4.5. Kayla highlights what I love most about this in Jones as a writer. There's the camp and the love of the genre that together just make for such a great experience. And it's also the human connections that is a fundamental part of this book, as she says, the relationship between our main character and his best friend. It's hard not to love this for that reason, in my opinion, as someone who loves horror, who loves camp, and loves the personal, like that real personal connection that feels real and feels earned. And that's what Jones is great at. It's heavy on the slasher tropes, and it manifests in the story of the slasher. It's interesting because it sort of recontextualizes the slasher almost like a victim, in the sense that if we're in a horror movie and we're forced to play our parts, the slasher has no choice but to play that part as well. I'm gonna have to reread it because I feel like there was definitely much more like messaging here. As much fun and tropey and just casual fun as it is, I think there's depth here, but below the surface, that just makes it really thoughtful book to consider. And like this idea of him as the victim, like is he the victim, or is he the monster using horror as an excuse to do these things? And I don't quite know if we're supposed to make an answer there, which is why I want to reread it to see if there's more hints, or if I can solidify my feelings on that by just rereading it. Whether it's intentional or not, that's what will happen when I reread it. So I love this book, and I'm so glad I finally had a chance to read it. Next up, at number 3, we have
Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right by Arlie Russell Hochschild. I had seen a review somewhere that said that Strangers in Their Own Land was the book to read if you wanted to understand why Trump won. The author sets off to a certain area in Louisiana to answer what she calls the Great Paradox, which is, why do Tea Party voters in particular vote for political stances that want to deregulate environmental protection when they themselves live in some of the most polluted environmental areas in the United States? To understand why these people that she's interviewing vote the way they do. And I do think that it is the first time that I have read something like that and been like, oh, I could see how someone could think that way. I also think that the author really manages to very much humanize all of the people that she talks to.
Yet again, Audrey, another favorite booktuber who has really thoughtful conversations and discussions about books. Much smaller booktuber, I think, than many of the ones that I've talked about here today. This was also not the first one that I read from her list. Just by circumstance, I couldn't not finish the other ones that I started, and I'm glad. This was a really great book. I think gave it 4.5 stars. For the reasons that she really highlights. I should have said so early on that obviously these are edited down to less than a minute or less. It's hard to really capture her full thoughts as well as the others' thoughts on their books in 1 minute. This is especially true here. It's much more than just about environmentalism. That's just how she opens up the conversation. It's really about understanding the swath of beliefs that are seemingly self-contradictory within conservative movements, specifically the conservative voters in these rural areas who are actively voting against their own interests. Understanding them while also humanizing them. And I suppose that is a necessary thing to do right now. It's hard, to be honest, as someone who resents a lot of people for the things they do, the things they say. Let's not dwell in the pain of the moment. If we have to maintain hope, the ability to move forward, and I think part of that is understanding why we're here. This is one aspect of that. I do not want to pretend like it's just this, like it's just a matter of politics. I think there is a lot of reasons why we are where we are, but this is a really good way of investigating that. And I think it also would work well in conjunction with Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson, which is also a book thinking about the way in which voters think and why they think the way they do, and also how they're manipulated by politicians. And then up at number, I think I lost count somewhere. Anyway, that was number 4. Now up to number 3.
The Reformatory by Tananarive Dew. This is so good, but so heartbreaking at the same time. Oh my gosh. We have Robert, and he has this altercation with this arsehole white boy who has this arsehole white father who gets Robert sent to the Reformatory for 6 months. Oh my god, Robert's sister Gloria was glorious. I loved her. I also really loved Robert. I really was rooting for him to get out of the Reformatory. There were scenes at the funhouse that got me so uncomfortable, and oh my gosh, there were so many scary things about this. There are like hints or like ghosts, but I feel like you can't get any scarier than the humans, like the actual people in this. Fucking Haddock fucking hate him. He was the worst of the worst. Definitely, like, well written by Tananarive Due, I thought, because, you know, he elicits so much emotion in me and so much hatred. But, oh my god, my most loathed. I hated Haddock so much. Not a single boring moment for me. But I couldn't stop reading. I needed to know. I needed to know if Robert got out of there.
Yet again, I wholeheartedly agree here, specifically with Gavin and his thoughts on just how well written it is and how badly you just want to keep reading to know what happens, to believe that there was hope at the end of the line. Obviously, you'll have to read it to find out. Tananarive Due is just one of the best writers out there, best horror writers, because of her ability to use speculative fiction, and particularly horror, to dig so deeply into real world issues. And obviously, I guess that's a bit easier here because the real horror isn't the ghosts, it's the people behind it. But even then, I felt like the sort of gothic nature of the story was really well made. I read this largely during the dead of winter when I had to bike late at night. I say late is after 6 here when it gets dark, I mean. And more than once, I found myself out there in this sort of upstate New York, rural parts, barely any light, and it worked. I absolutely love it when I feel unnerved. I don't believe in ghosts, but I love it when a story can make me feel unnerved regardless. Damn, is she good at setting the tone. And then you add on to that the true horror of the situation and just the exploration of the entire environment around what's going on. The real problems, not just with our characters, but with the society itself. Such a fucking good book. And to be honest, this was another example of a booktuber I wanted to highlight, but also another new release that I really wanted to read. And I found someone who I enjoy who has already read it, thankfully. Surprisingly hard. I'm surprised it wasn't on more people's top 10 lists. Continuing on to number 2.
I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, translated from French by Ros Swartz. 39 women and 1 girl are locked in a bunker underground. They don't know why. They don't know what their crime is, or when or even if they'll be released. Hartman has considered exactly what you will learn and what you will remain ignorant of. Our natural drive for answers compels us to keep reading this and to consume it quickly. But some of the questions we have will never be answered, and questions that we don't even think about will be answered. This is a book about humanity. It is ultimately an exploration of nature versus nurture and what makes us human, and what meaning does our life have if we know we're going to be the last of our kind.
This is a post-apocalyptic novel that begins in a cage deep underground where 39 women are being held captive. Among them is the youngest prisoner, a girl who feels like she sits apart from the rest of them because she has no recollection of a life outside of captivity. She becomes the key to their ultimate escape, but what they escape into is a very strange and desolate world above, and it does offer them freedom, but very, very few answers. I thought this book was absolutely devastating in a very short, tight, and compact way. It manages to not only say so much, but invite you to think so much in a very small package. In this book, Hartman uses the dystopian premise as a framework to ask much larger questions about humanity, where there is like some innate quality of humanity that we have, or if it's all built through socialization and relationship.
And I debated how to present this. If you're here this far in the video, I appreciate you. And to be clear, I am linking obviously every video that I've referenced here below. I just really wanted to have a way of highlighting these books and these people who are talking about these books without just rehashing what they already said, right? I agree with both Scott and Marina. I agree with them what they said. Basically, they said everything I could hope to say. My love of this is the mystery that drives the story, but that is not really the point of the story. And it's just this really interesting situation that could be any number of things that allows the author to explore these characters, how they act, how you would act in a whole wide array of situations without restricting ourselves to one specific situation. This was so close to being the best book in this entire list. It is easily going to be a best book of the year. I fucking love this book. It may still be the best new book that I've read. Spoilers for what's coming next. It's a reread. It had sort of a mix of The Handmaid's Tale meets The Road. It was just very compelling and thought-provoking. and how it structured it in a way that was somehow lacking in details in the best way possible, in a way that feels so deliberate, but also just very well done. Absolutely love this book. Completely recommend. And then finally, at number 10,
James Baldwin's Another Country. Okay, so this book is a fantastic book to read. This was the second reading of the book for me. This is a book that is set in the 1950s. Baldwin killed it in this one. I mean, if you have not read Baldwin, this would not be a bad place to start. The dialogue is fantastic. There's so much going on in the book, how he sets everything up. You have this motley crew of friends. And what he does is, through the difficulties of their relationships, we find out a lot of things that hurdle the discussions on race, gender, sexuality, expectations, and just so many other things. It's one of those books you can read it and reread it and you'll probably still see things.
So Deidre is another booktuber who I love, who has very thoughtful conversations, and I just wanted to highlight her here. Again, it was hard to convey her full thoughts here in under a minute, but I agree with everything she said about Another Country. It's diverse set of casts and the interpersonal relationship between them that makes this book so great. And I think it really highlights Baldwin's skills. It's probably the favorite book that I've read by him. I have not read his entire backlist, but I've read a good chunk of it. It's just a book that I absolutely adore the first time I read it. And when I saw it, Deidre put it in her top books of the year, I thought, I don't usually include rereads in best books or in this kind of a video, but I'll be honest, I wanted to reread it, and it was a perfect excuse to do that. It's just a great book for rereads and for discussions because of the complex interpersonal relationships that are going on. And like I said, it highlights Baldwin's skills at dealing with people and really good characterization of different individuals in society. And I think it's just a unique skill that very few people have to really understand people on the way that he seems to do. Granted, my ability to assess that is fundamentally limited by my understanding of people too. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm not completely unaware of this sort of self-contradictory nature of what I just said. It was an amazing book and a list of very thoughtful books. And ultimately, being a reread, it is still going to be probably the best book of the bunch. I don't know if I'll do this again this year. I won't lie, there were so many other books that I wanted to read from these booktubers and other booktubers. And so I may do it. It depends how compelled I feel. It like I said, it took me 6 months to both read and then finally combine my thoughts and the thoughts of these little booktubers into one coherent whole. I want to reiterate how much I love each of these booktubers and the content they make. I strongly recommend you checking out all their videos below in their channels if you haven't. Most of them are pretty popular anyways. I hope you can appreciate the love that I bring to this video, even though I am trying to objectively rank best to worst. Thank you so much for being to the end. It's going to be a chunky video, no doubt, but it was a lot of fun and a lot of work, and one that I'm very happy with, or I think I'll be happy with. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon. And have a great day and stay safe.